The ICU at 2:12 a.m. carried a hum that felt thinner than usual. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Wind pressed rain against the high windows. The monitors formed a low chorus of beeps and soft alarms that blended into something almost steady. Erin Hale clocked in 12 minutes early. No one noticed. She moved down the ICU row without announcing herself. In bed 3, she tightened a loose arterial line connection that had been taped poorly. In bed 5, she relabeled a syringe pump where the timing sticker had begun to peel. She corrected a medication schedule in the chart that was off by 7 minutes, small enough to overlook, large enough to compound over hours. Her hands were quiet, precise, no wasted motion. She reset a ventilator alarm threshold that had been silenced instead of adjusted. No one thanked her. At the central desk, the night charge nurse glanced up. "Float nurse?" she asked. "Yes. Stick to support tasks. We've got a neuro case in 1. Don't crowd it." Erin nodded once. Support tasks meant invisible. A senior resident stood near the glass doors of ICU room 1, arms folded. "Brain event," he was saying to a cluster of staff. "Massive. Hypoxic time unclear. We're probably looking at a non-survivable injury." His tone was clinical, almost relieved to categorize it. "Family?" someone asked. "On the way. Or maybe not. Complicated." He didn't say the word Admiral, but it hung there, unspoken. Inside the room, a teenage girl lay motionless under the ventilator. 17, maybe 18. Dark hair against white pillow, skin pale under ICU light, pupils sluggish beneath taped lids. EEG tracing faint enough to invite interpretation. Erin stepped inside only when asked to adjust a pump. She kept her voice low. "Pressors at current rate?" she asked. The resident did not look at her. "Maintain. It won't change outcome." Erin nodded. The girl's heart rate drifted between irregular beats. Blood pressure hovered, unstable but present. CO2 readings edged lower than they should have for a brain-dead pattern. Erin's eyes moved from monitor to ventilator settings. Respiratory rate, sedation level, core temperature. The numbers did not align cleanly. She filed it quietly. The attending had not arrived yet. The resident continued speaking as if the conclusion had already been reached. "We'll begin formal brain death evaluation once labs confirm. Prepare family for likely comfort measures." Erin adjusted the IV tubing and felt the girl's wrist for radial pulse. Faint, not absent. She looked at the sedation record. Dose high, temperature slightly below normal threshold, vent settings marginally aggressive, subtle, but present. She stepped back toward the doorway. "Has CO2 been trended against the sedation timing?" she asked carefully. The resident turned sharply. "Excuse me?" "The CO2 drop began before the last sedation increase," she said evenly. A pause, then a tight smile. "Stay in your lane," he replied. "We've done this before." Erin lowered her gaze slightly. "Yes." She did not argue. She stepped out of the room. In the hallway, 2 nurses whispered. "Poor kid," one said. "They're saying she's gone." "Already?" the other asked. "Pretty much." Erin returned to the desk and opened the chart quietly. She did not change anything. She did not override. She documented. 0206, CO2 trending downward before sedation adjustment. 0209, pupillary response inconsistent with flat EEG reading. 0211, core temp borderline low for reliable neurological assessment. She typed without commentary, no accusation, just timestamps. Inside room 1, the resident's voice softened as he spoke to someone on the phone. "Yes, it's severe. We're doing everything appropriate." Erin looked back through the glass. The girl's chest rose and fell under mechanical rhythm, not dramatic, not hopeful, but not final. Erin stepped inside once more under the pretense of checking a line. She placed her fingers lightly at the base of the girl's thumb. Not testing, feeling. There. A faint fluctuation that did not match the narrative forming around the bed. Her expression did not change. Behind her, the resident said quietly, "Prepare documentation." Time of death forms were placed on the counter outside the room. The charge nurse glanced at them, then away. Erin stepped out again. She did not touch the paperwork. She returned to the central desk and wrote one final note in the chart. 02-12. Clinical presentation inconsistent with immediate brain death confirmation. Recommend reassessment after controlled correction of variables. She saved it. No bold language, no dramatic claim, just enough to exist. The storm pressed harder against the glass. In the hallway, fatigue made decisions easier. Inside room 1, a teenage girl lay between interpretation and reality. Erin folded her hands at the desk. Calm, still, absorbing every number the monitors refused to explain. Thin ice, and no one else seemed to feel it cracking. By 2:24 a.m., the room had shifted from uncertainty to conclusion. The ICU attending arrived with quiet authority, coat still damp from the storm outside. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. He moved to the foot of the bed and scanned the monitors once. The neuro-resident stood beside him, tablet in hand. "Severe hypoxic event," the resident began. "Unresponsive, minimal EEG activity, pupils non-reactive on last check." "Core temperature?" the attending asked. 34.8. The attending nodded slowly. "Sedation?" "High, but within protocol." The charge nurse stepped closer, clipboard ready. The teenage girl lay between them, ventilator cycling in steady rhythm. Tubes and lines surrounded her like quiet witnesses. The attending leaned in and lifted one eyelid with gloved fingers. "Minimal," he said. He released it gently, as if already detached. "Prepare for formal brain death assessment," he continued. "We'll proceed per checklist." The word checklist landed heavier than it should have. The resident began reciting steps from memory. Apnea test, confirmatory imaging, absence of brainstem reflexes, documentation sequence. It sounded procedural, efficient. Erin stood near the wall, hands folded. Her eyes moved from the ventilator screen to the medication pump. Propofol infusion, vasopressors, core temperature monitor. The ventilator's CO2 reading dipped again. She stepped forward slightly. "Has the sedation been held long enough for accurate assessment?" she asked, voice measured. The resident exhaled sharply. "We've covered that. The temperature is below the standard threshold for reliable exam," she continued calmly. The attending did not look at her. "It's borderline," he said, "not disqualifying." Erin's eyes flicked to the ventilator settings again. Respiratory rate was compensating more than expected. Her CO2 drop preceded the last sedation adjustment, she said quietly. The resident turned fully now. "Stay in your lane." The words were not loud, they were final. The charge nurse shifted uncomfortably. Erin lowered her gaze. "Yes." She stepped back. The conference resumed as if she had not spoken. "Family informed?" the attending asked. A hospital liaison standing near the doorway cleared her throat. "The father is currently unreachable," she said carefully. "We're told he's on a secure flight. No direct contact until landing." "Military?" the resident asked under his breath. The liaison did not answer directly. "Command has been notified," she said. The attending nodded once. "Proceed without delay. We cannot wait for travel schedules." The tone in the room became firmer, more administrative. The resident began filling out preliminary documentation fields on his tablet. Time of evaluation. Erin felt her pulse rise, not panic, urgency. She looked again at the temperature reading, 34.8, and falling. The room felt colder than it was. She stepped forward one final time. "May we wait for the pending labs?" she asked evenly. 5 to 7 minutes. The attending looked at her now. For what purpose? To confirm there is no reversible variable affecting exam. The resident shook his head. Labs will not resurrect cortical activity. Erin kept her tone steady. They may clarify it. A pause. The attending studied her face. Are you suggesting we're misreading this? No, she replied immediately. I'm asking for confirmation. The room went still. The attending glanced at the clock. We are not delaying formal assessment for a float nurse's uncertainty. The words were not cruel. They were efficient. He turned back to the bed. Prepare apnea test. The charge nurse reached for the time of death paperwork resting on the counter outside. Not filled, but ready. Erin stepped back into the shadow near the wall. Her breathing slowed deliberately. In her peripheral vision, she saw the EEG line waver. Not flat, not strong, but not cleanly absent. The ventilator cycled again. The girl's chest rose, fell. Erin's mind ran through variables: temperature suppression, sedative stacking, CO2 washout from aggressive vent compensation, each factor small alone, together capable of mimicking finality. She did not argue again. She walked quietly to the central desk, opened the lab panel, results pending. 3 minutes, she documented without commentary. 0227, brain death protocol initiated with core temperature below standard optimal range. 0228, sedation not fully metabolized given infusion timing. No accusation, just data. Inside the room, the resident lifted the girl's eyelid again. Non-reactive. The attending nodded. Proceed. The liaison stepped closer to the door, tension visible in her posture. Her father will want details, she said softly. He'll receive them, the attending replied. Erin's face remained composed, but her hands, folded at the desk, pressed slightly tighter against each other. Thin ice was no longer cracking, it was giving way. The forms lay ready, the words almost spoken, and Erin knew, if they declared it now, if they locked it in, there would be no return. She glanced once more at the CO2 trend. Still not right. Her calm exterior held. Inside, the urgency sharpened. 5 minutes. That was all she needed. But the clock was not waiting for her. At 2:31 a.m., the ICU emptied for a moment. The attending stepped out to speak with administration. The resident followed, tablet in hand, already rehearsing language for documentation. The room grew quieter, not peaceful, suspended. Erin stood at the doorway for 2 seconds, listening to the ventilator's rhythm. Rain tapped against the window beyond the blinds. The EEG line flickered faintly across the screen. She stepped inside. No audience, no hierarchy, just numbers and a teenage girl who had not been given the benefit of uncertainty. Erin moved to the bedside and adjusted the sheet slightly, exposing the patient's forearm. The skin tone was pale, but not mottled. Capillary refill was slow, delayed, but not absent. She leaned closer to the girl's face. Breath pattern, mechanical, yes, but the diaphragm showed faint asynchronous movement beneath the vent cycle. Subtle. Most would call it artifact. Erin did not. She checked the pupils again. The resident had documented non-reactive. Erin dimmed the overhead light slightly and used a smaller penlight from her pocket. A slower sweep. Left eye. Nothing. Right eye. A fractional contraction, not a reflexive twitch, a response. Her expression did not change. She placed her fingers gently at the carotid artery and counted under her breath. The heart rhythm held steady despite suppressed numbers. CO2 still low, too low. She studied the ventilator settings again, respiratory rate compensating aggressively for a suppressed neural signal. In field conditions, she had seen this pattern before. Neuro shutdown that looked final, but wasn't. Triggered by hypoxia and compounded by sedation stacking. Reversible, if identified early enough. She inhaled once, steadying. No theatrics, no dramatic motion. She adjusted the head of the bed by 2 degrees, barely perceptible. changed neck alignment minutely to reduce pressure on the carotid sinus. Her fingers found a point just below the angle of the jaw and applied controlled, brief pressure. Precise, measured. A bedside maneuver she had learned in a place where there were no EEGs, where confirmation had to be physical. She waited. 3 seconds. Released. The monitor flickered. Heart rate shifted by 2 beats. CO2 rose by 1 point. Tiny, but real. Erin did not react. She repeated the alignment correction once more, this time adjusting the ventilator rate down by a single increment within allowable variance. Breath. Release. The EEG tracing sharpened for a fraction of a second, a ripple where there had been near flatness. She watched. Not hope. Data. She returned the ventilator rate to its original setting, repeated the maneuver. Again, the CO2 ticked upward slightly before settling. Again, the EEG line showed a brief increase in activity, not random, patterned. She straightened. The door opened behind her. "What are you doing?" The neuro-resident stood in the doorway, eyes narrowing. Erin did not turn sharply. "Reassessing," she said. "You adjusted the vent. Within allowable limits. You're not neuro." "I'm not." He stepped closer, glancing at the monitor. "What was that?" he demanded, pointing at the brief EEG fluctuation. "A variable," she replied. He folded his arms. "You can't just experiment on a brain-dead patient." "She has not been declared," Erin said evenly. He stepped forward. "You're violating protocol." Erin turned to face him fully now. Her posture remained relaxed. "If I am," she said calmly, "document it." The resident stared at her. "You think you found something no one else did?" "I think the data is incomplete." He shook his head in frustration. "This is not the field. This is an ICU." Erin held his gaze. "Yes. Then act like it." She nodded once. "I am." The EEG flickered again, brief but undeniable. The resident glanced back at the screen, then at her hands. "What did you just do?" "A positional assessment," she replied. "That's not a recognized brain death test." "No." Silence stretched. The ventilator cycled. The girl's chest rose and fell. Erin stepped closer to the bed again and repeated the maneuver one final time. Gentler, controlled. The EEG responded. Small surge, then stabilization at a slightly higher baseline than before. The resident swallowed. "You can't just get the attending," Erin said quietly. He blinked. "I'm serious." "So am I." He hesitated. "Get him now." It was not loud, not forceful, but the tone had shifted. For the first time since she had arrived, Erin did not look like a float nurse asking permission. She looked like someone who had seen this pattern before and refused to let it be ignored. The resident studied the monitor again. The numbers held slightly higher than before, tiny changes, but measurable. He turned toward the hallway. "If this is nothing," he said over his shoulder, "it's on you." "Yes," Erin replied. She turned back to the girl, placed her hand lightly on the patient's wrist, not dramatic, not sentimental, just confirmation. The pulse was stronger than it had been 10 minutes earlier. Outside, footsteps approached quickly. Inside, the EEG line trembled again, not flat, not gone. Thin ice cracking from beneath the surface, and for the first time that night, the hierarchy in the room had shifted by a fraction. Small, but irreversible. The attending entered fast, not rushed, controlled, but irritated. "What is this?" he asked, stepping to the foot of the bed. The resident spoke first. She adjusted the vent, did some kind of positional maneuver. EEG flickered. The attending's eyes moved to Erin. "Out," he said flatly. "This is not your call." Erin did not move immediately. She kept her hands at her sides. "I need 30 seconds, she said calmly. "You've already taken more than that." "She has one abnormal variable," Erin continued. "Her CO2 trend is inconsistent with confirmed brain death. Her core temperature is below ideal exam threshold. Sedation overlap is unresolved. The attending's jaw tightened. We are not debating fundamentals with a float nurse. I am not debating, Erin replied. I am reporting. The resident crossed his arms. She thinks this is reversible. I think it is misread, Erin corrected quietly. The attending stepped closer, lowering his voice but not his authority. This case is not about pride, it is about clarity. We do not delay inevitable outcomes because someone is uncomfortable with them. I am not uncomfortable, Erin said evenly. The room went still for a fraction of a second. The attending studied her. You are overstepping. I am asking for one corrective step before confirmation. And what corrective step would that be? He asked, tone edged with disbelief. Normalize temperature to standard threshold. Reduce ventilator compensation for controlled CO2 reassessment. Confirm sedation clearance window. The resident exhaled sharply. She's suggesting we redo half the exam. I am suggesting we remove false positive variables. The attending shook his head once. No. We proceed as planned. The charge nurse shifted uncomfortably near the wall. Erin nodded. Yes, sir. She stepped toward the ventilator panel, but stopped short. I will not alter exam protocol without your order, she said. Good, he replied, but I can prepare for corrective reassessment in parallel. The attending narrowed his eyes. Meaning? I can stabilize temperature with passive warming measures. I can request a fresh blood gas draw. I can ensure sedation metabolism is documented in real time. The resident gave a short laugh. The rookie nurse thinks she's neuro. A couple of staff members exchanged tight smiles. The tension tried to dissolve into dismissal. Erin did not react. She reached for a warming blanket from the supply rack and unfolded it carefully. This does not alter protocol, she said quietly. It improves data quality. The attending hesitated. Technically, she was correct. He did not give permission. He did not stop her. Erin placed the warming blanket across the girl's torso with measured movements, ensuring no line tension shifted. She checked the temperature probe placement and adjusted it slightly for more accurate core reading. Blood gas, she said softly to the respiratory therapist. Now! The therapist glanced at the attending. He gave a small nod, irritated but conceding. Erin returned to the ventilator. I am not changing settings, she said aloud. I am documenting current compensation. She pointed to the CO2 reading. Her CO2 is being artificially lowered by aggressive respiratory rate that can suppress measurable neural activity. The resident shook his head. Correlation is not causation. No, Erin agreed, but it is variable. The attending's patience thinned. We are not redesigning protocol at 2:40 in the morning. I am not redesigning, she said. I am verifying. The blood gas sample was drawn. The warming blanket activated with a low hum. Rain intensified against the windows. The EEG line continued its faint tremor. The attending glanced at the monitor. Proceed with apnea prep, he said. Erin did not argue. She stepped back, hands folded. 2 minutes passed. The temperature reading climbed slowly, 35.2. The blood gas result populated on the screen. CO2 higher than expected for declared brain death trajectory. The respiratory therapist frowned. That's odd, he murmured. The resident leaned closer. It must be a lab error. Erin did not look at them. She watched the EEG. As the temperature rose incrementally, the tracing sharpened again, slightly more distinct peaks, small but consistent. The attending's posture changed. Repeat the blood gas, he said. The resident hesitated. We're wasting time. Repeat it, the attending said more firmly. Silence replaced the earlier laughter. The warming blanket continued its low hum. The girl's heart rate steadied into a slightly stronger rhythm. The EEG flickered again, no longer near flat. The attending stepped closer to the monitor. "Hold," he said. No one moved. The room felt colder despite the rising temperature. The repeat blood gas returned within minutes, CO2 trending upward toward normal range. The resident stared at the numbers. "That shouldn't—" "But it is," Erin said quietly. The attending did not look at her. He looked at the monitor. "Delay formal confirmation," he said. The words were small, but final. The room fell silent. No one laughed now. No one dismissed. Erin stepped back into her place near the wall, hands folded, face calm. The hierarchy had not shattered, but it had shifted, just enough to crack the certainty that had nearly ended a life. Thin ice had not broken, not yet, but it was no longer trusted. The delay had been granted, not as validation, as caution. The attending stood at the foot of the bed, watching the monitors with new tension in his jaw. "Repeat neurological exam after temperature correction," he said. The resident nodded, less certain now. Erin remained near the head of the bed, eyes steady on the EEG and ventilator. The pattern was still there, suppressed neural activity that fluctuated with CO2 and perfusion, reversible window, narrow. She inhaled once. "There is one more step we can take," she said quietly. The attending did not look at her. "Within reason." "It's within reason," she replied. He turned now. "What step?" "Targeted CO2 normalization with controlled hypercapnic challenge. Very brief. Monitored." The resident stiffened. "That's not civilian protocol for suspected brain death." "It is not standard here," Erin agreed. The attending's expression sharpened. "You're suggesting we deliberately alter CO2 levels?" "For diagnostic clarification," she said. "Short duration, strict boundary, continuous monitoring." The room went still. "That borders on experimental," the resident said. "It is physiologic," Erin replied calmly. "Hypercapnia increases cerebral blood flow. If residual neural function exists, it will respond. If none exists, nothing changes." "And if you're wrong?" the attending asked. "Then nothing changes," she said. "We proceed as planned." The attending studied her. "You're confident." "I am controlled." Silence. The charge nurse glanced at Erin, then at the monitors. The senior ICU nurse who had worked nights for 20 years stepped closer. "What are the boundaries?" she asked Erin quietly. 30 to 60 seconds, no more," Erin said. "Increase end-tidal CO2 gradually. Monitor blood pressure continuously. Abort if instability exceeds 5% baseline." The senior nurse nodded slowly. She had watched Erin all night. No panic, no ego, just data. "She's not guessing," the senior nurse said to the attending. The attending hesitated. "This is not textbook," he said. "No," Erin agreed. "It is physiology." The storm rattled the windows again. The girl lay motionless, warming blanket humming softly. The attending exhaled once. 30 seconds, he said. "Controlled. I call stop." "Yes, sir." Erin moved to the ventilator panel. Her fingers adjusted the respiratory rate down incrementally, allowing CO2 to rise within safe parameters. She did not rush. She did not dramatize. "Baseline blood pressure?" she asked. The respiratory therapist answered. "Stable." "EEG recording?" she asked. "Continuous." "Timer," she said quietly. The senior nurse glanced at her watch. "Start." The ventilator cycled slower. CO2 began to rise gradually. 45 seconds, 48, 50. The attending's eyes flicked between monitors. At 20 seconds, nothing changed. At 25, the EEG sharpened, not random artifact, a measurable increase in amplitude. The resident leaned forward. "That's noise." "Wait," Erin said softly. 30 seconds. The heart rate increased by 3 beats. Pupillary response, minimal but present. The attending stepped closer to the monitor. Hold. The senior nurse nodded. 30. Erin returned the ventilator settings to baseline immediately. CO2 stabilized. The EEG retained a slightly higher amplitude than before, no longer near flat. A response, fragile, but undeniable. No one spoke. The resident's mouth opened slightly, then closed. That shouldn't... It did, the senior nurse said quietly. The attending stared at the tracing. Repeat once, he said. Erin nodded. Same boundaries, same timing, controlled. The second challenge produced the same result, incremental but reproducible neural activity increase under elevated CO2. The attending stepped back slowly. Document response, he said. His tone had changed, less dismissive, more defensive. He turned toward the resident. Delay brain death confirmation. Continue active management. The resident swallowed. Yes. Erin stepped away from the ventilator. She did not smile. She did not look at anyone. She simply checked the blood pressure again. Stable, fragile, but responsive. The attending faced her. You said this was reversible under certain conditions. Yes. And you've seen it before. She held his gaze for a fraction of a second. I've seen misreads, she said. He nodded once. From this point forward, all decisions go through me. Yes, sir. The words were compliance, but something had shifted. The attending's authority was no longer absolute certainty. It was caution. He glanced at the door, then back at the monitors. We are not declaring anything tonight, he said quietly. The resident exhaled, shaken. The senior nurse met Erin's eyes briefly. Respect, not applause, just acknowledgement. The girl's EEG held its fragile rhythm, not recovered, not safe, but alive. The technique no one here had been taught had bought time. And in the ICU at 2:52 a.m., time was everything. At 3:07 a.m., the door to the ICU opened again, not with urgency, with authority. The hospital administrator stepped inside, coat still on, expression tight. Why is this case not closed? She asked before anyone greeted her. The attending straightened at the foot of the bed. We identified reversible variables, he said evenly. We are reassessing. The administrator's eyes moved to the monitors, then to the paperwork still unsigned on the counter. This was communicated as non-survivable. It was premature, the attending replied. Her gaze shifted toward Erin. Who altered protocol? Silence lingered half a second too long. The resident answered first. She initiated a CO2 challenge. The administrator's jaw tightened. Without approval? With conditional approval, the attending said quickly. Under my supervision. His tone had changed again, less irritated, more protective of himself. The administrator stepped closer to Erin. You are the float nurse. Yes. You are not assigned to neurocritical decisions. No. But you altered a case that was moving toward declaration. Erin did not defend herself. She adjusted the warming blanket slightly, ensuring even distribution. Her numbers were inconsistent, she said calmly. That is not your lane, the administrator replied. No, Erin agreed. The attending cleared his throat. She identified a variable we overlooked. The administrator's eyes sharpened. So this is a diagnostic dispute. It is a clinical reassessment, the attending corrected. The administrator glanced toward the liaison near the hallway. You understand who this patient is, she said quietly. The liaison nodded once. Erin kept her eyes on the monitor. She did not look at either of them. Competence over politics. The EEG line held fragile amplitude. The CO2 level stabilized. The blood pressure dipped slightly. 3 points lower. She adjusted the pressure drip by a fraction, documented the change. The administrator folded her arms. Is there documentation for this intervention? Yes, the attending said. I would like to see it. The resident handed over the tablet. As she scrolled, her eyes paused. Who is Erin Hale? she asked. The question hung in the air. The attending did not answer immediately. She's a recent hire, he said finally. ICU ER float. The administrator tapped the screen. Her background file is partially redacted. Silence deepened. The resident blinked. Redacted? The administrator nodded. Prior service history listed but sealed. Clearance code attached. The liaison shifted subtly. Whispers began near the desk. Why would a nurse have clearance? Erin did not react. She adjusted the ventilator tubing to reduce drag tension. The administrator closed the tablet. Security will remain nearby, she said coolly. We cannot afford liability. 2 uniformed security officers appeared at the far end of the unit within minutes, not aggressive, but present, watching, as if Erin were the risk. The attending's posture shifted again. He turned slightly toward Erin. This needs to stabilize quickly, he said quietly. Yes, she replied, and if it doesn't? We continue care. He studied her face. You understand what's at stake? Yes. The administrator stepped toward the doorway. Proceed cautiously, she said. I expect updates every 15 minutes. She left as quietly as she had entered. The door closed. The air in the room changed. Less clinical, more political. The resident looked at Erin differently now, not mocking, suspicious. You didn't mention prior service, he said. You didn't ask, she replied. The blood pressure dipped again. 4 points. The EEG amplitude wavered. The fragile window narrowed. Time was compressing. Erin adjusted the sedation down by a controlled margin, within allowable range. The resident noticed. Don't push it, he warned. I'm not, she said. The senior nurse stepped closer to her. You okay? She asked quietly. Yes. It was not entirely true, but it was steady. At the far end of the hall, one of the security officers spoke into a radio, watching Erin, not the monitors. The patient's heart rhythm fluttered. CO2 began to fall again. The warming blanket stabilized temperature at 36, but the neural window was closing. Erin felt it, a narrowing opportunity. If they paused too long, the brain would cross into irreversible territory. She calculated quickly. One more corrective intervention could sustain perfusion, but it would require stepping beyond optics, beyond the administrator's caution. The attending met her eyes. He saw the calculation. You're thinking about something, he said quietly. Yes. If it crosses policy, I cannot shield you. I know. The monitor alarmed softly, blood pressure dropping further. The resident swore under his breath. We're losing her. The security officer at the doorway leaned in slightly, watching. Erin's hands hovered near the IV pump. She could obey the optics. Wait, let the case drift toward the narrative already prepared, or she could intervene again, documented, controlled, and risk termination. The EEG line trembled faintly, alive, but fading. Erin's voice remained calm. We need to act now, she said. The room held its breath. Politics pressed from one side, physiology from the other, and Erin Hale stood between them, knowing that whatever she chose next would cost her something. The monitors dipped again. Blood pressure fell another 6 points. The EEG amplitude thinned, not flat, but fading toward it. The attending stepped closer, voice low. What are you thinking? Erin kept her eyes on the waveform. Controlled perfusion support, she said. Brief induced hyperoxia with targeted cerebral perfusion adjustment. We're losing the window. The resident stiffened. That requires formal sign-off. Yes, Erin said. The attending shook his head immediately. No. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. With administration already watching, we are not escalating beyond protocol. If we don't, Erin replied evenly, she crosses the threshold. The attending's jaw tightened. If we do and she crashes, This becomes negligence. The word hung heavy. He was not wrong. The administrator's shadow still lingered in the hall. Security stood at the far end of the unit, pretending not to listen. The attending exhaled slowly. "I will not authorize that," he said. It was not anger. It was fear. Erin nodded once. "Yes, sir." She stepped back. The senior nurse moved beside her quietly. "What do you need?" the nurse asked under her breath. Erin did not look at her. "Respiratory." The respiratory therapist was already watching the numbers. "I'm here," he said. Erin spoke softly. "Controlled increase in oxygen concentration. 30 seconds, no more. Maintain current pressure. I will adjust perfusion support manually." The therapist hesitated. "That's aggressive." "It is measured," Erin replied. The senior nurse glanced toward the attending. He was speaking with the resident now, back partially turned. The door to the ICU room closed with a quiet click as the nurse pulled it halfway shut, not locked, just contained. Erin stepped to the bedside. Her hands were steady. She adjusted the IV pump to deliver a slight increase in vasopressor support within safe boundaries, documented the exact time, documented the exact rate, no commentary, no emotion, just data. The respiratory therapist adjusted the oxygen concentration incrementally. "Timer," Erin said. The senior nurse nodded. "Start." The oxygen level increased. Perfusion support rose slightly. Erin placed her fingers at the patient's carotid again. Pulse, weak. She leaned close to the monitor. 20 seconds. The EEG line trembled. Not stronger. Not yet. The blood pressure dipped once more. The resident turned. "What are you doing?" Erin did not look at him. "Stabilizing." "You don't have authorization." "I have documentation," she replied calmly. The attending stepped toward the bed. "Stop this." 30 seconds, Erin said evenly. "Stop it." 28 seconds. The attending's face flushed with contained anger. "Erin, I said stop." 25. The EEG flickered. A sharper peak, then another. The blood pressure steadied. The resident froze. "Wait," he whispered. 20 seconds. The EEG amplitude increased measurably. The pulse strengthened under Erin's fingers. The respiratory therapist's eyes widened. "That's not artifact." The attending stared at the monitor. "Hold." The senior nurse nodded. 20. Erin reduced the vasopressor increment back to baseline. The oxygen concentration returned to normal. She stepped back. The room went silent. The EEG line retained higher amplitude than before. Not normal, but no longer fading. The blood pressure stabilized. The attending looked at Erin. "You disobeyed a direct instruction." "Yes," she replied. No defense, no apology. "Document it," he said tightly. "I have." The door opened abruptly. The administrator stood there. "What is happening?" The resident swallowed. "She initiated an intervention without sign-off." The administrator's eyes locked on Erin. "You are aware that termination can be immediate for this?" "Yes." Her voice did not waver. The administrator glanced at the monitor. The EEG was visibly stronger than 15 minutes earlier. The blood pressure held. The temperature normalized. The room was no longer preparing paperwork. It was managing life. The administrator's expression shifted slightly. "Is she stable?" she asked the attending. He hesitated. "Yes," he said quietly. "For now." The administrator's gaze returned to Erin. "This will be reviewed." "Yes." She did not argue. She did not plead. She adjusted the IV line once more, ensuring no air bubbles remained. Her hands remained steady. The senior nurse stepped beside her. "She bought us time," the nurse said softly. The administrator said nothing. She turned and left the room again. The door closed. The attending remained at the foot of the bed. "You understand what you've done," he said. "Yes." "You may have saved her." "Yes." "You may have ended your employment." "Yes." Silence settled. The EEG line held its fragile rhythm. The monitors no longer drifted toward finality. Erin stepped back to her place near the wall, invisible again. Except she wasn't. She had won medically. The numbers were proof, but socially, politically, professionally, the cost was already unfolding. She folded her hands, calm, restraint intact, and the girl in the bed was still alive. The sound reached them before anyone spoke. Low at first, a distant vibration beneath the storm, then clearer. Rotor blades cutting through winter air. The ICU windows trembled faintly. The resident looked up. "That's not news traffic," he said. No one answered. The rhythm deepened, steady, deliberate, controlled. Erin did not move. She adjusted the patient's IV rate by a fraction, checked the pupil response again, still reactive, slow, but present. The rotor wash grew louder. The administrator reappeared in the doorway, phone pressed to her ear. "They're landing on the roof," she said quietly to no one in particular. The attending straightened. Within minutes, the corridor outside shifted. Not chaos, not shouting. Footsteps, measured, synchronized. The ICU doors opened. 4 individuals entered, dark uniforms, minimal insignia, one medical kit carried with precision, not urgency. They did not scan the room like tourists. They assessed. The lead officer removed his gloves slowly. "We're here for patient Evelyn Markham," he said. "Full name." The room froze. The attending cleared his throat. "She is currently under reassessment." "We require status," the officer said calmly, not loud, not aggressive, final. The administrator stepped forward. "I'm hospital administration. We've stabilized her, but—" "Clinical status," the officer repeated. The attending began again. "She presented with severe neurocompromise. We were proceeding with brain death confirmation, but a variable shift occurred." The officer's eyes moved across the monitors. He absorbed the numbers in seconds. "What intervention altered trajectory?" he asked. The attending hesitated. "It was a team reassessment." The officer's gaze did not shift. "Specifically." Silence stretched. The resident glanced toward Erin involuntarily. The senior nurse followed. It took less than a second. The officer noticed. He turned. "Who initiated the reversal protocol?" No one answered immediately. The resident swallowed. "It was just a float nurse," he said. "A rookie." The officer's eyes settled on Erin. She stood near the wall, hands folded loosely. He studied her posture. Not defensive, not eager. Calm. "Name," he said. "Erin Hale." The officer paused. A flicker, barely perceptible, crossed his expression. He stepped closer. "Rank?" he asked quietly. The administrator stiffened. "She is not military," she interjected quickly. Erin met the officer's gaze. "I am civilian staff," she said. The officer's eyes held hers a moment longer, then he gave a small nod. Not approval, recognition. He turned back to the monitors. "What protocol did you apply?" he asked Erin directly. She answered in measured terms. "Controlled perfusion support, limited hyperoxia challenge, reversible sedation correction, monitored within safe range." No embellishment, no reference to origin. The officer listened carefully. The senior Navy medic beside him checked the ventilator settings. "Timing?" the medic asked. 30-second window, Erin replied. The medic's eyes sharpened. He looked at the officer. A silent exchange passed between them. The officer turned back toward the attending. "You were proceeding with declaration." "Yes," the attending said carefully, "based on incomplete variables." The statement was neutral, not accusatory, but precise. The administrator shifted uncomfortably. "We were operating under available data." The officer nodded once. Then he addressed Erin again. "Current stability?" "Fragile but holding," she said. "Perfusion improved. EEG amplitude increased. Window remains narrow." The medic stepped closer to the bed. He adjusted nothing. He only observed. You documented everything? The officer asked. Yes. Good. The rotor noise continued overhead. The ICU air felt smaller. The officer removed a small secured device from his pocket. He spoke into it briefly. Patient viable. Reversal confirmed. Continue support. He replaced it. The attending tried to reassert footing. We are capable of managing her here. The officer did not look at him. We are not removing her. That surprised everyone. We are ensuring continuity, he continued, and correct protocol. His gaze returned to Erin. We need her in the room. The administrator blinked. Excuse me? The officer did not raise his voice. She remains primary on this intervention. The attending stiffened. She's not credentialed for... She already performed it, the officer said calmly. The statement settled like weight. The medic stepped beside Erin. Walk me through your perfusion thresholds, he said quietly. She did. Simple numbers. Clear rationale. No stories, no background. The medic nodded once. Maintain that trajectory. The officer addressed the room. No press, no documentation leaks. This case remains contained. The administrator nodded quickly. Of course. The officer stepped back toward the doorway. Before leaving, he looked at Erin one last time. No praise, no ceremony, just acknowledgement. Stay steady, he said. Then he and his team exited as quietly as they had entered. The rotor sound above gradually softened. The ICU felt different now, not chaotic, not relieved, reset. The attending stood still at the foot of the bed. He looked at Erin, then at the monitors, then back at Erin. The hierarchy had shifted, not loudly, but undeniably. Erin adjusted the IV line again. Her hands were steady. The girl on the bed remained alive, and now the room understood that the rookie nurse was something else entirely. The secure tablet was placed on a rolling stand near the foot of the bed. No announcement, no build-up. The Navy officer adjusted the angle slightly. Connection established, he said. The screen flickered once, then stabilized. A man in dress uniform appeared, not in ceremony posture, seated, back straight, face composed with effort. Admiral Markham. His expression did not break when he saw his daughter. It tightened. That was all. Status, he said. Not to the attending, not to the administrator. His eyes moved once across the room. They stopped on Erin. The officer nodded toward her. She initiated reversal protocol, he said simply. The Admiral studied Erin for half a second longer than necessary. Report, he said. Erin stepped forward. Her voice remained even. Severe neurocompromise on arrival. CO2 retention and sedation variables likely confounded initial assessment. Controlled perfusion support initiated. EEG amplitude increased. Pupillary response improving. Blood pressure stabilized with minimal support. Window remains narrow but viable. No mention of argument, no mention of resistance, no mention of risk. The Admiral listened without interrupting. Probability, he asked. Improving, Erin replied. Not guaranteed, but no longer terminal. A pause. The Admiral nodded once. Continue. The attending cleared his throat. We are coordinating with Navy medical oversight. All further decisions will run through... The Navy officer lifted a hand slightly. The attending stopped mid-sentence. The officer did not raise his voice. We are aligned with Ms. Hale's assessment. The word choice was deliberate. Not nurse, not rookie. Name. The Admiral's eyes narrowed slightly. Hale, he repeated. Yes, sir. There was the smallest shift in his posture. Unit? He asked quietly. The administrator stiffened again. Erin answered in neutral tone. Attached medical support. Prior service. The Admiral's gaze did not waver. 75th? He asked. She held his eyes. Yes, sir. The Navy officer glanced at her again. A flicker of recognition passed between them. No one else in the room understood the exchange. The attending looked confused. The resident blinked. The Admiral nodded once. Understood. He did not say, "Thank you." He did not say, "Brave." He did not say, "Extraordinary." Professional acknowledgement. Nothing more. The ventilator hissed softly. The EEG line climbed again, slightly stronger. The medic leaned closer. "Pupil response improving," he said. Erin stepped to the bedside. She adjusted the sedation down one controlled increment, documented the time. The patient's eyelid flickered, barely. But it was there. The resident leaned forward. "That's purposeful," he whispered. The attending stared at the monitor. The Admiral saw it on the screen. His jaw tightened. Emotion remained contained, but his shoulders shifted. "Continue," he repeated. The administrator spoke carefully. "We are prepared to provide full support." The Navy officer's tone remained calm. "You will." The attending tried again to recover authority. "We would have reached this conclusion regardless." The Navy officer did not look at him. "The outcome indicates otherwise." Silence fell again. The patient's heart rate stabilized within safer parameters. Perfusion pressure held. The EEG amplitude sustained. Not a miracle, not dramatic, just measurable survival. The Admiral's eyes remained on the screen. "You will remain with her," he said to Erin. "Yes, sir. If circumstances require additional authority, you have it." The administrator inhaled slightly at that. The Navy officer nodded once in agreement. The Admiral leaned slightly closer to the camera. "Your service is noted," he said quietly. "Not gratitude, not praise. Recognition." Erin inclined her head. "Understood." The screen went dark. Connection terminated. The rotor noise above had faded completely now. The ICU returned to its steady rhythm. The attending stepped back from the bed. His voice was controlled, but thinner than before. "Continue current protocol." Erin did not respond verbally. She was already checking capillary refill, already monitoring trend lines, already calculating next thresholds. The senior nurse squeezed Erin's shoulder once, quick, unseen. The room slowly dispersed into quiet focus. For the first time since 2:12 a.m., no one spoke about death. They spoke about maintenance, about monitoring, about recovery. Erin stepped briefly into the supply alcove alone, the door half closed behind her. She exhaled once, only once. Her hands trembled faintly now that no one was watching. She pressed her palm against the cool metal shelf, closed her eyes, one breath. Then she straightened, composure restored. When she returned to the bedside, her face was blank again. The Admiral's acknowledgement meant nothing publicly. There would be no announcement, no commendation. The Navy officer approached her quietly. "You are eligible for reinstatement," he said, "if you choose." "I decline," she replied. No hesitation. "You understand what that means?" "Yes." "Very well." He nodded once. Professional. Final. Erin turned back to the monitors. The girl's breathing pattern synchronized with the ventilator. Alive. Still fragile, but alive. Recognition had come, without applause, without spectacle. And Erin Hale stood beside the bed exactly as she had hours earlier. Quiet, invisible, indispensable. Dawn reached the ICU slowly. Not bright, filtered through winter clouds, pale light stretching across polished floors and stainless steel rails. The storm had passed. The fluorescent hum remained. Staff moved more quietly than usual. Voices stayed low, almost careful, as if sound itself might disturb what had barely been preserved. The Admiral's daughter slept under controlled sedation, not brain-dead, not declared, alive. The EEG displayed consistent activity now, fragile but steady. Blood pressure held without aggressive support. The senior nurse leaned against the counter, exhausted. "We almost lost her," she murmured. Erin adjusted the IV pump one last time. "Yes," she said. No emphasis, no ownership, just fact. In the hallway, the administrator spoke in hushed tones with the Navy officer. "We would prefer to present this as a collaborative reassessment," she said. The officer's voice remained calm. "It will not be presented publicly." "No press?" "No press. We could highlight our advanced neuro capabilities." The officer met her gaze evenly. "You will not." The administrator's posture stiffened slightly. "This hospital will remain unnamed," he said. "No threat, no force. Final." The administrator nodded once. Optics contained. Inside the ICU room, the attending approached Erin. He looked older than he had at 2:12 a.m. "You were correct," he said quietly. Erin checked the sedation level. "We were fortunate," she replied. He hesitated. "I should have listened sooner." Erin did not answer. He was speaking to himself as much as to her. The Navy officer stepped inside again. "The Admiral requests one final acknowledgement," he said. Erin nodded. The secure device activated briefly. The Admiral appeared once more, not in uniform now, still composed. "My daughter is stable," he said. "Yes, sir," Erin replied. "There will be no public statement." "Yes, sir." "You are owed one." "I do not require one." A pause. He studied her for a moment. "You chose the harder path," he said quietly. "Not the louder one." Erin held his gaze. "Yes, sir. That will be noted." The screen went dark. No emotion spilled, no visible gratitude. Professional closure. The Navy officer stepped aside. "If you change your mind about reinstatement," he said quietly, "you will have a place." "I understand." He nodded and left. The administrator returned once more. "We would like to offer you formal commendation," she said carefully. "Internal recognition, a statement in your file." "I prefer not," Erin replied. "You understand that could affect promotion?" "Yes." "What do you want?" the administrator asked. The question was not hostile now, just curious. Erin looked at the monitors, then at the hallway beyond. "Night staffing ratios adjusted for ICU crossover shifts," she said evenly. "Mandatory neuro reassessment training for residents, and grief support resources for staff after critical calls." The administrator blinked. "That's it?" "Yes." The administrator nodded slowly. "We can review those." Erin inclined her head. "That will be sufficient." Later, in a small office, a single form waited on a desk. Non-disclosure acknowledgement, protocol review summary. Erin signed where indicated. No flourish, no commentary. She unclipped her badge lanyard briefly to correct a twisted strap, then clipped it back into place. The senior nurse approached her in the hallway. "You're leaving?" "Shift is over." The nurse studied her face. "You could have let them declare it." "Yes." "You didn't." "No." The nurse swallowed. "They were wrong about you." Erin did not respond. At the supply cart near the exit, she paused. One IV line box was misaligned. She corrected it. A roll of gauze was placed in the wrong compartment. She fixed that too. Tourniquets were low. She restocked them. Small corrections. Invisible ones. The same as the beginning of the night. The ICU lights felt less harsh in daylight. Staff passed her with quieter nods. Not applause, not praise, just acknowledgement. Erin walked toward the exit. No escort, no ceremony. The automatic doors opened softly. Cold morning air met her face. Behind her, inside the ICU, one nurse stood watching. The senior nurse. She did not call out. She did not thank her again. She simply watched Erin step into the pale winter light. Hands steady, shoulders squared, face tired. No applause followed. Only the quiet understanding that the rookie nurse had never been a rookie at all. And inside the ICU, a girl who had nearly been declared dead continued to breathe, because someone chose restraint over ego and action over recognition.